tell us what to expect if we were to embark on a path that we were buying a business or selling a business. So we came up with this presentation to share with you all some stories about real deals that, for the most part, have transpired in this sector, and talk about what went well, the deals that did go well, talk about what went really wrong with the deals that went wrong, in hopes that you can walk away from this and learn from people who had before. So I've also, you've got your book there. Most of the slides are in the book, and I've inserted some new material that is not in this book. If you want to get that material, just email me afterwards. I've got cards up here, and I will email you that material. The material is not in the book because I wanted to insert some real-time data as to what is going on in the current marketplace as it relates to the buying and selling of businesses. And it's always great, for us anal people, despite my spelling error, when we get accurate, good data for the end of a calendar year. So by the time I submitted this presentation, and when I needed to submit the presentation, that data was not available. So if you want this information, feel free to send me an email, and I'll get you the information that's not in here. So let's go ahead and get into it. So the goals that we have for today, very simple. First, I want to talk about what's going on in the marketplace. So if you decide to embark on some sort of strategic transaction, you'll have some insight into what to expect. The second thing is, as I mentioned earlier, the goal is to really avoid all the pitfalls that trip up a lot of deals. As the statement there says, it's better to learn from the mistakes and the failures of others. The cost of that lesson is a lot lower than if we make it on our own. So let's start by giving a little background on myself. So my background predominantly is a serial entrepreneur. I am an investment banker also, but since I was 18 years old, I've been buying and selling and operating businesses that have been as small as a half a dozen employees up to as many as 1,400. I don't own any operating companies right now other than our firm, and I've owned businesses that have ranged from businesses that are much like yours, that are very asset-light, kind of recession-resistant, in the building services arena, and I've owned some other firms that provide technology-oriented services. So a lot of different types of services and businesses that I've been involved in. I'm the founder of Pursant. A little background on Pursant. What we do is, in the broadest sense, we are an investment banking firm. Most of the work that we do is mergers and acquisitions and raising capital for other people to embark on buying other businesses. We also have a division that provides financial services, which would be quality of earnings review for people that are looking to buy businesses, or post-acquisition financial integration for people that have bought businesses. We also do some more broad-based strategic advisory. And really what that means in our world is it's a lot of business optimization. So somebody comes to us and says, I'm thinking of selling my business in a year or 2 or 3 years. They'll engage us to work with them to really prepare that business for some sort of strategic event to sell all or a portion of the business. And we also, in select industries, do talent acquisition. When I say select industries, the industries that we work in are these industries right here. So we get to know these industries intimately well in a lot of different ways, sitting on both sides of the table, doing a lot of different strategic activities. So we get to know the companies, we get to know the players, and for our talent acquisition, we leverage that intel across these industries. But the common theme for us is really the size of businesses. Our firm works with businesses that generally have enterprise value of less than $250 million. And I know to a lot of folks that sounds like that's still a really big number, and it's much more value than my firm probably has. But believe it or not, that's still really the lower middle market. And the middle of the middle market starts at about $250 million. So we work with small businesses, we work with lower middle market sized businesses, but that's kind of the range there. We work with a lot of asset-light businesses. So I know there's people that have pavers and rollers and everything else in the room, and despite the ticket that you're spending to buy those machines, it's still considered an asset-light business compared to maybe a shipping company or a manufacturing company that's investing millions of dollars into its production machinery. So that's really just kind of gives you the frame of reference for when I'm talking about deals. Its sector is very similar to yourself, or in this case, a lot of the deals are transpiring actually in the pavement maintenance sector. Our team, it's not just me. Our team is about a dozen plus people with all different backgrounds, ranging from Wall Street to business owners to people fresh out of business school. So let's talk about M&A today before we get into the case studies. And I guess I better start my block here. So we're going to talk about why people are selling their businesses in today's marketplace. The dynamics are pretty interesting out there, especially since we're dealing with a lot of baby boomers that are finally reaching the age where they're thinking about actually pulling the trigger and selling the business. There's been a bit of a backlog of that. A lot of baby boomers were going to start to exit back, in the mid-2000s and late 2000s, like 08, 09. It got derailed with the recession, and a lot of those businesses have not recovered, and a lot of them will never recover. But the problem is they're not getting any younger. So eventually they're going to have to, despite what condition their business is in, they're going to have to do a deal. So we'll talk about who the buyers are. There's a lot of different buyers out there in the marketplace. We'll talk about their profile. We'll talk about whether it's a buyer's market or a seller's market. How long does it take to do a deal? If you want to do a deal. Valuation considerations. So when you're thinking about what's my business worth, what are the things that you should be thinking about? Goes along with that is valuation multiples, and last, is it the best time to buy or is it the best time to sell? So, share some current data with you. So, the data is from different sources. Some of it's from us, some of it's from organizations that we rely on the accuracy and the validity of the data. But the number one reason people are selling still, and it has been for a while, is retirement. However, this second bar right here, this burnout factor, is a lot higher since 2008, 2009 than it was prior to 2007 as far as reasons for selling. People, despite the fact that their business may not be in the best shape, and despite the fact that the market is maybe it's not favorable, they're just done. They're the turkey that's ready to come out of the oven, the button is popped, and it's just time for them to do a deal. And some of those people a lot of those people are not necessarily retiring, so it's not this moving to that, it's they want to start something new. They just have had enough of what they're doing. They'll take whatever is left over after they pay off their debts and pay off their taxes and start a new venture and get re-energized by that. Who the buyers are. So people ask me all the time, who's going to be the buyer for my business? And the short answer is it depends. It depends on the size of your business. So if you look at this chart, what you've got here is if your business is worth less than $500,000. You're generally going to be dealing with usually first-time individuals, so somebody who has maybe left corporate America, that has saved up some money, that is interested in working for themselves. So you take that and compare it against a business that is worth $5 to $50 million, the likelihood of somebody being able to put together the money to do that type of deal starts to drop off quite significantly. As opposed to people that come to me and say, well, what about private equity? Can I sell my business to private equity? And it depends. How big is your business? So you can see private equity, PE platform or PE add-on is, for the most part, pretty absent down here. That's not their playground. They start to get really excited up in these numbers right here. So again, it depends, and you'll get these slides later on, so if you want to dig in a little deeper, you can. I also get the question, is it a buyer's market or a seller's market? So it depends. If you're a small business, your business is worth less than $500,000. And small business, actually, the line gets drawn really kind of somewhere in here. Kind of the rule of thumb is if it's worth less than $5 to $10 million, it's still considered a small business. But if you're a small business, the buyers generally still have the upper hand. And there's just a lot more risk in buying a very small business. It's very fragile. It can evaporate, with just one bad move or something goes wrong with some key clients. It doesn't take much to disrupt. The value of those businesses is lower, and we'll talk about that a little later, but as you move up in size, the buyer's leverage goes down and the seller's leverage goes up. So if you have a business that's worth $2 to $5 million, you're really crossing into a territory right now, based on today's market conditions, where you're going to have the strength in a strategic transaction. And the short version of the reason why is there is an overabundant number of buyers in the marketplace. That is driven by the very low cost of capital right now. It's super, super cheap to get money. And there's very few good small businesses. And I'll focus on the word good because that's going to come up again later. There's a shortage of good businesses, and there's just a general shortage of businesses for sale in general compared to the number of buyers. So there's an imbalance. So and the shortest answer is it is a seller's market across the board, but you lose that control, and you lose that leverage, and you lose that upper hand when your business is small. Deal timeline. How is it going to take me to do a deal? And again, it depends on the size of the deal. It's kind of looking like 6 months to right around there, half a year, and that's generally what we see in our firm for smaller businesses. And when you get into bigger businesses, you're adding more time to the transaction cycle. And where we're counting the clock starting is the clock starts at the time that letter of intent is received. It may not be the time it's executed, but you get the offer in the form of the letter of intent to the time that it actually closes. And the difference between this 6 months and 10 months is essentially the due diligence that gets done. The bigger the deal, they're hiring third parties to come in and do third-party quality of earnings reviews and due diligence, and it just stretches out the timeline. And there's a lot more dollars at risk, so the deal does move a little slower, the purchase agreements get a little thicker, so everything just kind of slows down. Okay, valuation components to think about in today's market. So first thing is, in an industry like this, you're generally looking at multiples of EBITDA. Some may not know what EBITDA is, but EBITDA is the earnings or the net profit of your business. And then you're going to add back any interest expense that you may have to service debt, any depreciation that you may or may not be putting on your income statement, any amortization like lease payments. And then if you're one of the poor souls that has a C Corp, you're going to add back the income taxes that the corporation pays. So they're going to be adjusted generally, and what adjusted means is a lot of small businesses they generally are running expenses for the business that may not necessarily be related to the business. Sometimes that could be the trip to Hawaii. Sometimes that could be you've got the kids on payroll. So it could be things that are just simply not related to the ongoing operations of the business, so those get adjusted out. The other terms you should be familiar with is trailing 12 months, which means tell us what your earnings have been for the last 12 months. Not necessarily the calendar year, but what's been going on for the last 12 months. And the other thing they're going to look at is they're going to look at kind of a 3 to 5 year average. So if you've been fairly consistent, that's less relevant. But if you've been bouncing all over the place with your revenue and your earnings, then it is more relevant. The other thing that is increasingly more common right now that the economy is starting to do better, is this metric that is the run rate of the business. So let's say that you're one of the lucky few that has a business that's growing like this every single year. And you're thinking to yourself, well, why would I want to sell based on the last 12 months performance or even the last 3 to 5 year average when it's totally not consistent with where I'm tracking right now? So your run rate, the trend that you're on, may be much more relevant. And the buyers are receptive to those types of valuations. The devil's in the details, so the deal structure is going to have to accommodate that element of risk. that's in there for that type of valuation approach. But these are the different approaches that are the most common that we're seeing out there. Then what they're going to do is they're going to think about the risk profile of the business. So am I going to be at a 3-time multiple, a 4-time multiple, a 5-time multiple? What's going to drive that is this risk profile. So things to think about: the types of customers that you've got. The most attractive ones are, commercial in this sector. Commercial and retail are very attractive customers. Municipal, can be less attractive. They're more process-oriented relationships and less true relationship-oriented transactions. Residential is not real appealing. I'm not saying if you're servicing residential that's not good, you're not making money on it, but I'm just talking about in the M&A world. They don't like residential as much because there's less chance of that being recurring revenue. Speaking of recurring, so there's always generally going to be a look into how much of your customer base is a recurring customer base, and how much of your customer base is a new customer base. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's good that all of your customers are recurring customers, because then a buyer says, well, geez, what investment have you made into picking up new business, and how sustainable is this business after you leave? Because maybe you have all the relationships. So they're going to want to see a nice, healthy balance of both existing customers coming back year after year after year, and new customers coming into the fold, and ideally revenue growing as a result of that. Revenue concentrations. A lot of times we have those customers that keep us up at night because we know if they go away, we can take a big hit on the business, and it has the same effect on the buyer, the risk profile of the business. That customer goes away, all of a sudden the value of whatever they bought just drops. Margin trends. So this largely has to do with gross margin, more so than net margin. Is your gross margin going up? Is your gross margin going down? Is it staying consistent? Those are all things that they're going to factor into the risk profile of the business. The net margin is less relevant because that's generally your sales in general and administrative and overhead type costs, and they can play with all that after they do the deal. They have a lot more control over that. A lot less control over pricing, a lot less control over gross margin, especially to your existing customer base that has kind of expectations as to how you're going to charge them. Capitalized equipment investment. A lot of times what people will do is they say, well, I'm going to sell the business in a few years, so I'm going to not invest in the machinery. And that can come back to bite you. An astute buyer goes in and does a good look over on all the equipment, and if they see that it's nearing the end of its useful life, when they put forth their offer to you, they may not say it, but they're factoring in the fact that they got to buy new equipment. And that's additional cost to this deal. So minimally, what you want to make sure you're doing is keeping the equipment well maintained, so that there's no glaring issues in your big equipment inventory. Talent concentrations. So this is one of the biggest ones that I see, and that is I met with and he's not in the room, so that's good. I met with a guy down in Central Ohio not too long ago. Had a pavement maintenance company. Does about $10 million in revenue, and so that's great. Tell me about how that revenue comes in. He says, well, I sell 4 of it, and my salespeople sell the other 6 million of it. So, well, that's a problem. If you want to sell the business and you want to retire, because he wants to leave the business, he doesn't want to work for anybody else, which is smart because he's not employable. In fact, most of the people in this room are not employable. That's why we started businesses. So you always got to think in terms of, me leaving the business after I sell this business. So he's got a problem. The buyer's really only buying $6 million worth of revenue unless he can find a way to get his salespeople bringing in that other $4 million. I just told him, I said, go hire somebody or 2 people, glue them to your side for the next year, transition all those relationships you've got over to them, and then do a strategic transaction. But that is the biggest issue that I see in valuation. There's just all kinds of risks tied up in the owner. If he gets hit by a truck, if she decides that she just doesn't want to be part of the business anymore, it's a problem. Quality of earnings, so this is just good business practices. So you're running your books clean, is everything neat and tidy? You know, are you keeping your records that support your books, you know, neat and orderly? I mean, we'll go in to do due diligence on deals, and, you know, people will hand us boxes, you know, and shoe boxes sometimes, you know, for all the little incidental stuff. And that doesn't look good. It doesn't mean that your financial statements aren't accurate, but what it does is it creates anxiety for the buyer. And they immediately start to devalue it in their mind. And without any justification other than, this looks like a mess. So, there's other factors as well, and, you know, the size premium and the quality premium. These are two premiums. So when you think about valuing your business, these are the things that apply to all businesses. But there are two other things that are kind of overriding value-add components if you fall into these categories. A size premium is if you are significantly larger than the other players in your market, then you have an advantage over them. Even though on paper your percentages may look identical to them. From a valuation standpoint, you are going to demand a premium. We'll talk about that. Yeah?
So what's a market share number that gets either side, 50% or something like that? Or,
you know, see, like conversely, how we measure that. You know what I mean? Most of these industries, you know, they're so fragmented, it's really tough to measure your market share. I mean, if you're in a small town and you know that there's 300 facilities that are in your target market and you're doing 200 of them every year and you've got 2/3 market share, then that's real and that's measurable, and you can communicate that. But, you know, generally people kind of use the force. You know, does this really feel like somebody that's a big player in the market? And I mean, we generally know it. I mean, in our town, we know if we're the big dog or not. And, you know, the big dog is the one that, you know, gets the bigger bone, and especially when you're buying and selling businesses. The other thing is the quality premium. So you got a $10 million company or a $5 million company, either scenario, and you look at the financial performance of one and you look at the financial performance of the other. If you are 10% or better, now historical financial performance, if you are 10% better than your competitor, both in terms of revenue growth and margin growth, you are going to demand a higher premium for your business. That's just kind of how the math works. I mean, when we look at deals and we compare businesses that have higher financial performance against the ones that didn't, even though the businesses are the same size, there's an extra, to put it in real terms, it amounts to as little as a half of a multiple up to a full multiple is a good rule of thumb. So if person A's business sells for 4 times EBITDA, the person B, if they have a quality business and it's been growing at 10% or more per year and margins are 10% better than the other guy, then now you're talking about at least 4.5 or 5. That's kind of the rule of thumb out there. All the buyers are hating it right now. Okay, so this is a really busy slide, but you'll get all this later if you want. So this gives you a snapshot of the multiples that are happening in the marketplace. So this neighborhood down here, so these are transaction values. So it's not revenue, it's not profit. So if your business was worth $10 to $25 million in 2003 to 2010 period, it would be 5.6 multiple. Today it's about a 5.9. So not a lot of movement down there. Where you see the real big movement is in the big boys. So if your business was worth 100 to 250 million, back in this period it'd be 7.2. Now it's up closer to 9.1. So the size of the transaction value goes up, the multiples go up. Now I threw this in down here because it's separate from the GF data source. This is for businesses that have transaction values of 5 to 10. So I went down below this right here, 1 to 5, and then less than $1 million. So this gives you an idea of kind of where small business, Main Street, trades at. And it's going to be anywhere kind of on the low of a 2.5 for a business that's worth less than $1 million, up to 4.7. Now those are averages. It doesn't mean that you're 4.7. You may be 5.5. You may be 3.5. But that's kind of the average to expect in today's market. And the multiples in general are very strong right now compared to where they were 3-4 years ago. And again, that's just driven by the imbalance in the marketplace. There's more buyers and sellers. There's a very low cost of capital to get deals done. Organic growth generally is very low in almost every industry right now in the United States because the economy is growing at a very slow pace, and bigger companies are impatient to get the more aggressive growth, so they're starting to buy businesses just to complement their organic growth strategy. So, any questions on this slide before I move on? Because I know there's a lot going on. No? Okay, good. All right, the other question I get is, what is the best time to sell my business? And, a lot of people will say, well, you never really know. And actually, it is quite predictable to find the ideal windows. So if you go back the last 40 years and you look in 10-year increments, there's these very predictable business transfer cycles. And you're coming into, right now you're in a market, 2013 to 2018, where you're in a prime selling time. So the seller has a little more leverage. It doesn't mean that you don't want to do a deal down here. It just means it's probably not the optimal time. Does it mean your business is worth half? No. Is it going to be worth 10% less, maybe 15 or 20? Maybe. Probably not any less than that, as long as there hasn't been any fundamental change in the business. So this is just optimal timing. And I'll talk about these phases real quick. So if you look at history, historically, there's some sort of economic downturn, some sort of recession-oriented type of event that happens at the beginning of every decade. And capital supply becomes very restricted, rates go up, people borrow less money, and deal flow slows down, and people just get a little more reserved and a little more constrained in how they're buying businesses. Then we're kind of creatures of habit. We get tired of living like that. The economy improves, cost of money comes down, and we're fine starting to load up on debt again and going out and buying more businesses as a result of that. And that's kind of where we're at right now, where people are spending like a drunken sailor to buy businesses. There is more M&A activity in 2015 than any year since they've been tracking M&A. And 2014 used to be the leading year, so it's gone up from 2014, 2015. Super strong. In 2016, probably not going to change a lot. It certainly probably won't go up anymore, but it's not going to go down a lot either, unless there's some sort of macroeconomic event that derails everything. Now the Fed, may do a couple more rate increases. That's predicted to have some effect, but not a lot. It's not like we're just going to fall off this cliff. We're going to probably jump down a little notch, and then it'll plateau out. So again, it's just borrowing some sort of bigger, broader macro event. And then you go into this period of deleveraging where people say, oh geez, I got way too much debt, I got to unload, and I got to quit buying. And that's what they do, and then it starts all over again. So kind of creatures of habit every 10 years there. So that's a real quick snapshot on what's going on with M&A. I was going to jump into the case studies, but before I do that, any questions on the marketplace, on deals that are happening out there? Happy to take those right now while we're on this section right here.
I have a question. You said some of this we can get emailed to us?
Yeah, that first part of the presentation you just saw.
What about this video?
What's that?
And this video, can we get it?
I'll sell you that video for $1,000 a copy. No, I don't know. I don't know. Ranger,
you can do whatever you'd like with it.
Yeah, if I can get it to him, I'm fine getting it to him. We'll see how I do first.
Okay.
All right.
On that company in Ohio,
Yeah.
what were you going to base his sales at if he got that guy to follow him along for 2 years to teach him all his relationships?
Well, so if we go back to that slide, if he continued to grow like this, like he was I saw him 3 years earlier, he was at 5-6 million. If he continued on that track record, we'd be looking to structure a deal that was going to allow him to monetize, some component of that growth stream, as long as it actually comes to fruition.
So what's the number?
What's the number?
What you get a number? So,
well, a multiple on a business like that, I would expect it to be at least a 5. And, his earnings were pretty good earnings too. He was about a 12 to 15% EBITDA business, which in this industry, that's a pretty good EBITDA. So that means he had, I think it was about 8% net profit, and then you add on a few more points for some interest on equipment and depreciation. You add back his salary. So it was a pretty healthy business. Yeah.
On the talent acquisition,
Yeah.
your key managers, their age, how does that apply to them?
Well, it's a good question. So this same person, I had met him 3 years earlier, and his lead project guy, that was out in the field running the crews, was older, and health was a little on the edge. And we kind of talked about that and said, that may work against you a little bit, to the extent that that person is critical to the ongoing success of the business. But we didn't really think much of it. It was just something to be aware of. Incidentally, that person did end up passing, unfortunately. And he's got somebody new in there. But a buyer wants to see a team that has some more runway out in front of them, because if you're not going to stick around, and odds are you're not, then who is the one that's going to be able to sustain the operation as it stands today, and how many miles do they have left on them?
Do buyers look for employment contracts and stuff like that? Do you see that in museums?
Yeah, they're always going to ask for it. They're always going to push for it. They're going to say this deal is contingent upon us signing up this person, this person, and this person. Well, the problem is those people have, they have no responsibility. They have no obligation. You can't force them to sign that. So that becomes an interesting discussion when the owner sits down with them and says, look, in order for me to sell the business, you got to go work for the buyer. Well, what's in it for me? So that always prompts, so be thinking about your pie, and you might have to carve out some slices for your key people. And, a lot of times it's just the right thing to do anyway. But, that's an extra incentive for them to sign on with a new employer. Chances are they're not going to agree to sign on for more than a year anyway. And chances are they'll probably want to sign on just to see what it's like. And then at the end of the year, they make the decision whether they want to stick around or not.
Mark, if you could repeat the question, that will probably make sure it gets on the video for you.
Okay, all right. Want me to repeat that one too?
Yeah, we're good.
All right.
What percentage of the owners stay with a company when it's sold, and is there a contract that they normally keep them in there for a number of years, that this sort of a sense of consistency with the customers?
Yeah, in the world that we deal in, which is the lower middle market, so smaller businesses, it's probably less than half the time the owners stay with the business for an extended period. They're always going to stay for some sort of transition period. And the transition period is going to be defined generally by two things. Number one, so like we sold a paving company down in Florida about 15 months ago. And they were planning on staying for 6 months, just to really kind of make sure, okay, so, we keep, the seal coat over here, this is, the coffee maker, just kind of make sure everything, they knew everything was at. And they ended up leaving after 90 days. There was really nothing left to do. So that's just a transitionary role. And then there's other deals, which we've been involved in, where there's some sort of contingent payment or an earnout. So I'm going to pay you $5 million, I'm going to give you $3 million at close, and I'm going to give you $2 million at the end over the course of 2 or 3 years. Well, that seller is going to want to babysit that money. So they're generally going to want a payment agreement to the period in which that contingent money is going to be paid out, so they can make sure the business performs. And it's a win-win. I mean, the buyer, has somebody who has a vested interest in making sure that the business performs, for that, whatever agreed upon period is, and the seller gets paid for it. And that's very applicable when you've got businesses that have this kind of growth, where you're going to want to monetize something that happens near term after close.
So is that sort of how you're guaranteed your money? By staying with them? If I get $500,000 down and I carry $1.5 million on a contract, how am I guaranteed my money?
Yeah, so the question is, if I stick around, does that guarantee I get my money? Guarantee would be a strong word.
Right.
It increases the likelihood that you're going to get your money. So the last thing you're really going to feel comfortable with is saying, you know, look, we've just closed and you owe me another $2 million. I'm going to go head out to the beach. So just send me my checks. Here's the mailing address. And I'm sure the business will continue to perform well while I'm gone. So that's where the challenge comes in. Is, you know, and a lot of times, we'll talk about this actually in one of our case studies. So I'll add on that a little later. Yeah.
Do you charge a percentage of a broker when he wants to sell your business? He wants to charge you 10% of the sale price?
Yeah. So a traditional investment banking firm works off of a structure that's a fee that's on a sliding scale, and as the purchase price goes up, the fee goes up as well. Kind of like a broker, except we're just better.
What's the fee? You're not coming up with a fee.
No, I don't want to get into that right
You're
now.
not with your numbers. That my $5 million deal, you never really said exactly the number.
I'll get into that at the end.
Okay.
All right. I'm sorry, you had a question in the back?
What percentage of buyout would be, is normally owner finance?
Cash versus contingent or a note or something like that. So the question is, what percentage of the deal would be cash? What percentage would be contingent? And, you know, it's all across the board. If you go back to that risk profile slide. So if you've got a business that has stable earnings, that has a diversified team of people that still have miles left on them, if you've got no customer concentrations, so nobody represents more than 10% of revenue, you have good recurring customers coming back year after year after year, but you have new business coming in as well, you've got equipment that's in good shape, if everything really seems to be in order, then you can expect anywhere from 80 up to 100% of your deal in cash. I mean, the deal that we did down in Florida, that was an all-cash deal except for a holdback for indemnifications, which gets released after 18 months as long as something doesn't come through that was a surprise. You get into a business, though, that has a much higher risk component in it. Now you're looking at deals that get into, 70% cash, 50% cash. I mean, some deals turn into almost, just straight profit sharing because there's so much hair on the company. I mean, we've got a deal that we're working on in the Southeast right now, and it's an $18 million company, and it only has 3% profit, and that's a lot of risk. If there's one hiccup in that business at 3%, your profit's gone. So as a buyer, I'm thinking, boy, I want to have this business perform over an extended period of time before I pay, accordingly. So this is going to be very low cash, kind of like maybe 20%, 25% cash up front, and then the balance will be paid over a few years. And the sellers understand that. They don't like it. They didn't understand it like a year ago, but they understand it now. It's an education process. So, any other questions? Okay. All right, so let's talk about the case studies. If you got more questions as we're going through these case studies and these real deals, then feel free to throw them in at the time. Yeah?
If you're buying a competitor outside, you want to do a no compete, how long can you put that out for?
Generally 5 years. So the question is, if I'm buying one of my competitors, what about the non-compete? So rule of thumb is it's going to be at least 5 years for a competitor, assuming that they owned, the majority of the business. So I say that qualifier because we run into deals where there's a whole bunch of owners. This same deal in the Southeast, this $18 million company, has 40 shareholders in it. So grandma sitting in the rocking chair that's getting a dividend every year, we're probably not going to hold out for her non-compete, even though she is a shareholder. But the people that are active and intimately involved in the business, to the extent that we can do due diligence on that, are definitely going to be required to sign a non-compete. And again, 5 years is kind of a good rule of thumb. Okay, so let's jump into the case studies. Again, so there's 7 of them. They're all in your book. And all but one of them happened in this sector. So, you should be able to relate to it. And the other one that didn't happen in this sector, I'm just waiting for one like it to happen. It happened in another sector, but it's not entirely dissimilar to this sector. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to link these cases and the mistakes that were made back to failures in process. So if you look at, I don't know, how many here are golfers? I am too, I hate them. Okay, so, but if I think about the holes when I got an 8, you know, it didn't happen on the green typically. You know, something just went wrong on the tee box. You know, and then I overcorrected, you know, because I took too much of a chance when I was in the rough, you know, whatever. You just do one stupid thing after another. So, you know, it was just failure to perform, you know, good process when something goes wrong. You know, I'm a mountain climber, and, you know, anytime I've read stories about mountain climbing disasters, you know, it's all linked back to a stupid mistake that was made early on. They left too late, they went in weather conditions when they never should have gone, somebody wasn't feeling well. You know, really the sun, the moon, the stars need to align if you're going to embark on a mountain climbing expedition. If you're going to be in a plane, I mean, we see the pilots say that in front of the plane, going through that pre-flight checklist, and they go through that list every single flight, no matter how many years they've been flying, no matter how many flights they've taken, they follow a good process, and that prevents all the mishaps. You know, in your own world, you know, if you look at a finished product, you know, the seal coat job didn't come out right, the overlay didn't come out right, there was something that was missed, generally early on in the process, that has now caused the end result to just not be a good thing. So in deals, it usually ends up being the same thing. You know, something that could have been done, in most cases, to cause the deal not to derail, but people just don't know what to look for. You know, it's not a simple process to do a deal. So I'm going to run you through the steps real quick. There's 14 of them that we kind of call out as steps in the process. And then I'm going to challenge you to not go ahead in your books when we go into these cases and see if you can figure out what you think might have went wrong in the deal. So when you're going to look to embark on, in this case, we'll put ourselves in the shoes of the seller. So if you're going to sell your business, step number 1 is you optimize your company. So just like if you were going to sell your house, you don't just wake up Saturday morning and say, I'm going to put the house in the market today. You're going to go through and you're going to replace the carpet, you're going to clean the carpet, you're going to paint the walls, you're going to seal the driveway, you're going to make it ready. And a lot of people don't do that when they're selling their businesses. They just say, you know what, I'm done. I'm going to hire a broker and I'm going to sell the business. And they don't really give any thought to what kind of condition is my business in. So it seems like it makes common sense, but less than 10% of the people we talk to have actually done it. They call us when they're ready to sell. I'm like, you're calling us too late. You needed to call me like a year ago. Probably still do the deal anyway. Understand the value of the business. So when you go out to market to sell your house, you generally sit down with a realtor and they tell you this is what your house is worth and this is what we're going to list it for. And a lot of people don't do that when they're embarking on a decision to sell their business. They have their own mad math in their head of how much they think their business is worth. Let's see, I've spent 20 years on this thing. My marriage is in the crapper because of it, because I work all the time. I barely see my kids. I've lost my hair. I'm 50 pounds overweight. This thing's got to be worth $10 million bucks. Because of all the sacrifices I've made for the business. That's not valuation math that works in the buyer's mind. They understand and they sympathize for you, but that's not going to be factored into the numbers. So make sure you understand the true value, the market value of your business. Yeah.
At what point do you call a broker? Do you call as a preliminary in like 3 years or 5 years before you're interested in selling business? That person come in and say, all right, you need to do this, this, and this. Like a realtor would say, you put flowers out or you put it in the farm or whatever. And be able to do it in several stages?
Yeah, so the question is, when should I call a broker if I'm thinking about selling my business? Is it a year out, 2 years out, 3 years out? And, you know, I would say err more on the side of a longer period of time out, because we'll go into businesses, like we have a company in Chicago that we're working with in an optimization process. In about a year, they can really make the fundamental changes in their business that will put it in a much better position. And then there's other companies that we see that, you know, maybe, so the biggest issue to overcome that you're going to need a lot more time on is if you have a client base issue. If you have heavy concentration with a handful of clients, that's going to take a long time to deal with that. you know, you're either going to, essentially means you're going to need to bring in more business, and assuming that those clients are all profitable. But some things take longer. You know, personnel changes can take. You know, I doubt this guy in Cincinnati is going to be able to make that transition from him to these two people in a year. It's going to take him 6 months just to maybe find the right people. They probably won't work out. And then he's got to hire 2 new ones. So you got to go through all those gyrations to get everything lined up. So I would encourage people to start, you know, years in advance. And if it doesn't take you that long, it doesn't take you that long. I mean, you sell when you're ready. And when you talk about the value, you know, there's 2 ways you can do this. You can go out and you can have certified business valuation done by an NACFA certified business valuation, you know, individual. We do those. You know, you pay a fee, and it's pretty straightforward. I don't think you need to do that. I only encourage people to do that if you have, you know, maybe a partnership issue where you have to have a third-party formal valuation done. If you want to know what your business is worth, if you talk to a knowledgeable broker or advisor that knows your space, they'll give you a rule of thumb. They're going to say it's going to be worth somewhere between here and here, and they're generally pretty close. You know, as long as they're good. You know, some will give you this lofty number, set your expectations really high to get the deal, and then they can't deliver on that. So you may want to talk to 2 or 3 people, but those cost you nothing to get those. Secure confidentiality. So if you're going to start on this process, obviously you want to make sure that your employees don't become aware of it. So I recommend, you know, get another email address. Don't use your business email address. Don't take calls at your office. Make sure you get a solid NDA in place so that when you're talking to any parties, you know, you've got that comfort that at least legally you're protected. Doesn't mean it's going to change the behavior. You know, it just doesn't. I mean, word usually gets out at some point in time before you want it to get out, but you can lock it down as long as you possibly can by just having some good best practices there. Transaction team assembly. So these are the people you want to engage early. So you want an advisor, somebody's going to help manage the deal. You want to engage your attorney, and you want to engage your accountant. You're going to need all 3 of them to work in tandem during the entire phase of the deal process if you're going to do a deal. If you bring in somebody late, things will get messy and they'll get more expensive. So, educating your team about the business. This being your team. Make sure that they understand your business, not what business you're in, but your business. I mean, they really need to know your business intimately well in order to have credibility with the parties they're going to be talking to. Make sure they can speak to it almost as well as you can. Transaction strategy and packaging. So, you know, if you're dealing with a broker, they're going to put together a nice memorandum that tells and sells the story of your business, and they're going to lay out that person that puts that together is going to lay out the strategy for what we're going to do. The strategy basically starts here. We're going to build a buyer pool, and they're going to help you select the right buyers that you should be bringing to the table. They're going to help you make the presentation to the potential buyers, but you can expect to be doing most of the talking because you represent the business better than anybody can. There's going to be relationship building. So, you know, there's an old saying that time is the enemy of every deal. But at the same time, it's nice to have a certain amount of time go by before you actually close on your deal, because if you do the deal super quick and you move super quick and you don't really get to know the parties, you can run the risk of things really getting derailed later on because it was just a disconnect in the people, in the chemistry. Chemistry takes a while to really get discovered and get developed. Yeah.
Is the buyer pool geographic as compared to the size of the deal? So the smaller the deal, a buyer is going to be local,
yeah,
bigger, and then
yeah. If we go back to that slide, you know, if you got a business that's worth less than $1 million, it's probably going to be a local buyer. But if you've got a business that's bigger, you may get a regional player that's looking for more concentration in the market. You may get a national player who's looking for a platform. So your options for buyers change quite dramatically as your company scales up. And there's a lot of strategic buyers, not necessarily strategic in your industry, but adjacent to your industry. So it's not unusual. I mean, I did a deal where we had a pavement maintenance company buy a roofing company. And, you know, same client base, you know, you're kind of doing the same thing on roof as you're doing on the parking lot, kind of, sort of. But there was a lot of synergies between those two companies, even though we're in different industries. I saw another hand go up. No? Okay. Transaction negotiation and deal structure, that's kind of self-explanatory. You're going to start the deal. And, the structure is certainly as equally as important as the purchase price. Due diligence, this is when you can really expect to just feel awful. You know, they're going to dig into your business into places that you either didn't want them going and they have the right to go. You're going to get offended because they're going to ask you questions that sound like they think you're lying, and they don't, but that's the way it sounds. So it's a very emotional phase of the process. Documentation, this is a very expensive phase of the process. Yeah?
To go back to the negotiation and deal structure, will you come up with a structure initially that you say this is my optimal deal, and then have that as a point to negotiate away from or around? Is that what you would propose doing?
So generally when we're up here and we're talking to our advisor, you should be talking to that advisor about deal expectations. So what is the purchase price? What is the payout period? What are the material terms and conditions I should be expected to agree to? So you want to have that firmly implanted in your head before you get down to here, because if there's a disconnect between this and this, then things are just going to fall apart, and you've wasted a lot of time and a lot of money. Yeah.
Do you ever ask any potential buyer to put any type of deposit down before you open up your information to them?
It happens. It's rare. It happens. It's very common in bigger deals where there's real money. Okay, so let me answer your question two ways. So if it's a situation where you're trying to substantiate somebody's ability to actually fund the deal, kind of like a pre-qualification if you're selling your house, then it is very common to ask for what's called a comfort letter. And a comfort letter would come on bank letterhead that says this company has either the equity in their business or the credit facilities available through us as an institution to fund this deal. So that's a little different than earnest money or breakup fees. So in other words, we're going to agree to do a deal and you walk away. And I've already spent money on legal fees and things like that. That happens. It's not very common, that it happens. It works both ways, because if you decide to walk away, I don't like it, then you're going to sacrifice the money too. It generally only enters, the clock starts running on that breakup fee after, really a definitive agreement gets signed. It's very uncommon, but it does happen, and there are right terms and situations to do that. Documentation, again, that's the attorney's world, and closing. The final step is transition and integration, and this is probably one of the most. This one and that one, number 1 and number 14, get really underestimated, and as a result, businesses end up trading hands for a lot less than they should, and deals fall apart after they close, and everybody's pretty miserable. So we'll touch base on those. So when we go into these case studies, I will task you to tell me which one of those 14 steps in the process caused or lacked to do that, so caused the derailment. So here's the first transaction. It was a $50 million company. It was a few weeks before close, and the seller is about to fight. So these are revenue numbers, by the way. So these aren't selling values or anything. This is the revenue of the business. $5 million seller asked for a purchase price increase per the advice of his legal counsel, or he will cancel the deal. So, anybody have any thoughts? You can all flip ahead. Answer is. What's that?
4. It should have been done up front.
Yeah. So.
Back at 4, not at the end, right?
Yeah. So, the attorney in this particular case was brought into the process very late in the process, and I don't know who he had look at his letter of intent, but the letter of intent was signed and then had an attorney review, but it wasn't the same attorney. And he brings in a new attorney when you see the copy of the asset purchase agreement. And the new attorney pushes back and says, you should not do this deal. I'm in a very emotional state right now as the seller. And now I've got my advisor on the sell side, my attorney telling me I should not do this deal. And specifically it was, you should not be giving any working capital with this business. You should keep all of your cash, and the purchase price is too low. So, you want to change tapes? You got 4 minutes? Okay, all right. So we'll finish up this case. So the deal got derailed, and ultimately, what ended up happening was we were able to finally agree on terms. The purchase price did go up, but it went up on an earn-out basis. This was one of those businesses that was growing like this, and we agreed that, okay, we can get you some additional compensation, but it's going to have to be on the come. And this was a case where the business owner was staying after the deal was closed and was going to stick around for a couple of years. That was agreed upon even up front. But now, for sure, they were going to stick around because there was this earn-out component in there. So it allowed him to get more money for the business, to monetize the upswing that they were on. We did get the working capital that we needed to. We were representing the buyer in this case. We did get the working capital component back into the business, but it was not an easy task. And the attorney just proved to be very difficult all the way up until close. Just a nightmare to work with. And that's the other thing, is a lot of people, when you think about your attorney in a deal that is going to represent you, don't think of the toughest attorney you know, because they may kill the deal. I mean, attorneys, they're there to manage risk, and we absolutely want them to do their job. A lot of them overstep their bounds. I don't know if it's insecurity or whatever, but they'll kill deals and they don't think twice about it. So think about an attorney that wants to get the deal done but wants to protect your risk. Both of those things. Question?
Do you see that people view their attorneys as experts in business sales?
Absolutely.
They forget the whole process of really where their expertise is.
Yeah, the question is, do people view their attorneys as deal experts? And the reality is most attorneys are not deal experts. They're thinking, they've got blinders on. They're looking at purchase agreements, and they're not thinking about the strategic aspects of the deal. They're thinking about the language and the risk management side of the deal. So they can be very counterproductive. If it's the wrong one. There was another question for you.
How do you find an attorney that because your normal divorce attorney or your regular business, where you talk about contracts or something, how do you find an attorney that is a business attorney?
Yeah. You generally want to, I would recommend going to a middle market, firm as opposed to the small local law office, which is perfect for making sure that, your annual report is filed, and just kind of the more administrative things that are ordinary course of business things, if you will. But strategic transactions is a very specialized expertise for attorneys, and you're generally not going to get that at a small law firm that has a half a dozen attorneys. So you go to the firm that has maybe 50 attorneys, and they're going to have people that are deal people, they're bankruptcy people. They're going to have that specialization.
If you go to a Mucker attorney, they would be able to direct what attorney you would need for starting the process.
Yeah. So we're going to hold our breath here for 30 seconds while we're going to change the tape. So the question is the question about the clarification on EBITDA. So EBITDA is earnings, also known as net profit, before, that's the B, interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Okay, so let's jump into the next case. You got a $6 million seller. He's ready to take a deal. He's got the deal in hand, and he's ready to pull the trigger and do the deal on it. And he's debating whether or not to explore offers from other buyers as well. So, any thoughts? Right decision or wrong decision? Oh, and it's all cash.
Onion run.
So is this a good move? The answer is it depends. So, and it depends on a couple things. First, do you know where the market is at on your business? So if you know for a fact that businesses like yours are trading at $5 million, based on all of your metrics, and somebody offers you 7, then in that case, I would probably advise somebody, take the deal, it's a strong deal, you're gonna create a lot of noise, and you may lose your buyer in hand if you bring other parties into the process and create an auction environment. So, that's an off-market deal. So off-market deals you'll hear about happen when there's a knowledgeable seller and a knowledgeable buyer. They know exactly what they're getting into. They know exactly that this deal is good for both of them, and there's really no need to bring in other parties, to become disruptive to the process. In this case, the buyer did not know, the seller did not know that. He had no idea what his business is worth. So when we stepped in, we focused on the buyer pool development and making sure he understood the value of his business. He had no idea what the business was worth and had no other buyer pools. So we ran a process. The value of running a process is it gives you, assuming that you don't know what the market value of your business is, it gives you credibility when you're negotiating with other parties. I've got this term BATNA up there. If anybody's taking the negotiation courses, you'll hear that term. And BATNA means the best alternative to no agreement. So who has the better outcome if we don't do a deal here? And if I know my business is worth more than what somebody is offering me, I really got nothing to lose. I got pretty strong alternatives if this deal doesn't happen. I can go to market and I can get this done by somebody else. So in this case, if you've got multiple parties lined up to buy your business, you've got more leverage. In the process, you've got more leverage in the relationship. And it tests where the market is really at from a valuation perspective. So that's really the best way to see what your business is worth is, you go out, you run a controlled, managed process, and you see where the offers come in. In this case, how it ended was he actually ended up doing the deal with the original party. The deal was 30% higher. And the deal was 30% higher because we went out and we got other offers. We presented it to the initial buyer, who really was the best party from a chemistry standpoint. We just showed them. We blinded the other offers and said, here's where the market's at. All right, I'll do the deal. Yeah. But we didn't know unless we ran a process. So, case number 3. Buyer gets to 1 week before close, and you got a $3 million passive seller who changes his mind and decides not to sell. So small business, passive seller versus an active seller. Passive seller is Timothy, who I say, Timothy, I'm interested in buying your business. And you say, I hadn't really thought about it, but I'm interested in what you have to say. I'll give you $10 million. That sounds pretty good. I think I want to do the deal. And you go out and you start managing the process and get down to the goal line and you're like, wow, I just don't want to do this. So he was a passive seller, he wasn't in the market. Whereas, let's say Roger has actively listed his business with a broker and he's made the conscious decision that it's time for me to retire, my button is popped, I'm out of here. I've got a high level of probability I can probably actually close on the deal with Roger if the terms and conditions are right. So in this case, the passive seller bailed on it. And the mistake that was made was really right here. And in this particular case, Timothy said yes, I said great, we started managing the process. Me as the buyer, I really failed to spend a lot of time kind of building a relationship with Timothy and getting in his head and getting to know him and understanding, what makes him tick and really working on, something would have probably surfaced. Because I would have said, so what are you going to do after the business is sold? We would have had those kind of discussions. And earlier on, Timothy might have said, I don't know if I'm ready to do a deal, so I really don't want you to spend the money with your attorney to have a purchase agreement drafted. So the relationship building during the deal process, and that's your job. Assuming you got your attorney, assuming you got your banker or your accountant, assuming you got your advisor, let them manage the deal. All of your energy should be focused on the relationship between the parties. because that's ultimately what's going to get through all the speed bumps that are going to happen in the deal process that your advisors are going to have to get you over. So, and it's also going to reveal any issues that are coming up that maybe you don't have that visibility into and weren't really expecting. So, just real quick bullets on a passive seller. There's advantages and disadvantages. If he remains a passive seller, he'll probably just work with me. He's not going to go through a competitive bid process because we've got good rapport going, and he's comfortable with the valuation that I've offered him. He asked me what the number was. I told him, and he was good with that. So you're not going to have to compete in an auction environment with a passive seller eventually, generally. The downside is they are often on the fence. They may not know it, but they're going to be on this emotional roller coaster through the whole process, and just hopefully it ends, on a high. You want to make sure that you keep reading their feelings and their thoughts all through the process, so you can head off any major problems early. Build a relationship. This is where the breakup fee comes in. So let's say that I'm starting to get concerned, and that Timothy might be going off the tracks, and I'm starting to spend some real money. And Timothy even says to me, I don't know if I want to do this. Because it'll manifest itself in other ways. He won't just say, I don't know if I want to do the deal. He'll start pushing back in a passive-aggressive kind of way. I'm not going to agree to that. I'm not going to agree to those terms and conditions. And he'll just dig in. And it's like, wow, this is starting to get tough now. So if I start to get a sense that, sometime between now and when I cut that check, he may walk from the deal, I may want to, and I'm starting to spend real money, I may want to say to Timothy, look, let's get the purchase agreement signed, but I'm going to ask, us to have a breakup fee here, so that if it gets derailed, after we sign the agreement and before I fund the deal, that we can recover our costs. Again, it doesn't happen often, but oftentimes it comes across like a prenup. It just says, I don't trust you. I think you're full of it. I think you're going to bail on me. And I mean, that's how it gets interpreted, and people get offended by it. So that's why it doesn't happen a lot. It's just that everything has to line up like in the wrong way for you to have the breakup fee in there.
Just want to eliminate tire kickers.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So that's the pre-qualification. If somebody's going to submit a term sheet to you, and they're going to submit with that a bank letter that says they've got the ability to fund this deal, that's not a tire kicker. Tire kickers should get screened out by your advisors, because they should be pre-qualifying those people. So, I mean, when we build a buyer pool, that may start with 50 names. We may end up taking bids from 10 people. Because the other 40, we talk to them, and it's like, I just don't have the sense that they got the ability to fund this deal. Because we do due diligence on them. Tell me how big your business is. Send us over your financial statements. Who's your banker? I mean, we do that due diligence, and a lot of them will get offended. Well, I can do this deal. I understand that you feel you can do the deal, but I have a responsibility to my client to make sure that you can do the deal. And sometimes they'll walk away. It probably wasn't meant to be. So, how did it end? There was no deal. It didn't get done. Timothy wasn't ready to sell. And he still owns his business today. And that was 2.5 years ago. Okay, case number 4. The buyer gets to the purchase agreement stage with a $10 million seller, and an earn-out language battle ensues and the deal stalls out. So we talked about earn-outs a little earlier. So again, the earn-out is, I'm going to pay you $10 million for the business. I'm only going to give you $7 million in cash. The other $3 million I'm going to give you over 3 years, assuming that the business performs at a level that's equal to or greater than where it's at the time that we closed. So you're going to have some language in that purchase agreement that protects you, the seller. Says, well, you can't, that's fine, but you're going to own this business. You can't go out and hire like 57 salespeople and kill the profit because you want to invest in the growth and you wipe out my earnout. Well, the buyer says, well, geez, I do want to invest in the growth. Okay, so, all right, well, we can deal with that by kind of carve that off into, a separate category that doesn't affect the earnout. Or let's say that The seller says, well, what if you do a bad job with my clients? I'm not going to be the one servicing them anymore. And what if you lose those clients? How does that impact me, the seller, and my earnout? I didn't screw it up, you did. Well, how would we put language in there for that? Just, you could have 20 pages of language just on the earnout to try to, protect both parties. But at the end of the day, it's extremely difficult, and it ends up being a big, big problem in deals. So, I won't even ask the question, but so this is a deal structure issue, and so the buyer doesn't want to pay. Again, the reason that the earnout comes into play is the buyer doesn't want to pay for things that are going to happen in the future. They don't want to pay for them up front. So that's number one. The seller doesn't like the earnout because they lose control of the business. The seller also views it as, well, wait a minute, if I was working here during that period of time, I'd be taking that money, but now you're taking the money. So you're kind of like paying me with my own money. And the other part is an earnout oftentimes ends up being really expensive financing. And I'll explain why that is. If you go back to the early stages of the process and you've got your valuation expectations, and your broker says to you, what do you need to get for the business? Here's what we feel the business is worth. You know what? I'd like to see 10, but I would take 8. If I could get 8 and walk away, that'd be great. I'm okay with that. Well, you're not telling the sellers that. So the seller comes in and says, look, I'll give you $10 million for your business, $7 million in cash, $3 million on an earnout. And so now I'm paying potentially $10 million for the business when I could have bought the business for $8 million and saved myself the $2 million if I would have just forked up another $1 million in cash and close. But I didn't really know that. And the seller is thinking, well, geez, I like that $10 million deal because I think I could get at least 1 year of the earnout. That gets me to the, to the bogey that I had right at the beginning of the $8 million. And then everything else above and beyond that is gravy. Well, if the buyer knew about this, he's thinking, wow, I'm just giving away $2 million and I really didn't need to give away. So that's what I mean by it can be really expensive financing. If a seller agrees to the earnout, to a certain extent, a lot of sellers are thinking, I'm never going to get that money anymore. So it's not unusual to go back if you get into this tug of war over earnout language and say, look, let's just agree on an all-cash deal. Discounted, I'm not going to pay you what I'm not going to pay you the $10 million, but it's going to be discounted. And that can often be a solution. In this particular deal, that's how it ended. They came back,
Yeah, but the other thing you got to worry about is, where does it throw you into the tax bracket? You go sell your business and when you stretch it out into certain payments to try and stay within the tax bracket so you don't end up paying capital gains on selling this business, stretch it over a period of time, and okay, well, how do I word it so that I'm going to pay over 5 years? But where is the equity?
You can generally accelerate all of those contingent payments into the closing year, and then if you don't receive those monies, they end up coming off as a deduction in following years. So there's creative things you can do from a tax standpoint to deal with future receipt of earnings, but that's where your tax advisor comes in. And everybody's tax structure is different. Your basis, everybody's different. So it's not an easy question, but it's a relevant question. And the answer is you got to factor that in when you're negotiating the deal. Okay. So case number 5, a buyer acquires a $10 million seller out of its core geographic market. A year later, the $10 million company that they bought is down to $2 million. So anybody want to speculate on what went wrong in that deal? So this is what went wrong. So you closed the deal. The business was in good shape when you closed the deal. What happened after you closed the deal? Because the place fell apart. It fell apart because the parties really did a crummy job of focusing on the transition and the integration component. And this doesn't happen at the closing table. Well, that was great doing that deal with you. Now let's figure out how to put these companies together. It happens so much. It needs to start like after you've received the letter of intent. While your advisors are working on the deal and you're building that relationship, that's when you start talking about, okay, so let's talk about people. Let's talk about how they're going to work together. Let's talk about our cultures. Let's talk about what the transition looks like. Let's talk about, you know, everything that's going to make sure that this is a success after the deal closes, because it's already a success. We know that. Otherwise, you know, I wouldn't be buying the business. So in this case, so bad deals, people talk about, oh, it was a bad deal. More often than not, bad deals went bad because of something that happened after the close and with the integration of the business. They seldom happen because somebody paid. Yeah.
Is that like where one company's buying another company and there's duplication of jobs and people leave the company that's being sold? And that's what?
Yeah, so the question is, you got one company buying the other company, you've got duplicate positions, you got two of these, two of those, and people start to lose their jobs. That can certainly create anxiety. You know, for the people in the business, they start to wonder, am I going to keep my job? They start looking for jobs elsewhere, and they start leaving. So, you know, there is an art to doing integration. I always encourage people, when they're doing deals, and my buyers, to say, I understand you're going to want to eliminate these redundant positions, because that is a synergy, that is an efficiency. I would encourage you to stay away from that practice for at least a year. And value the deal accordingly, you know, because they're thinking, wow, that's money I can use to kind of accelerate my payback period. That's true, but don't be so impatient to pull the trigger on that the day after close. Because if you come in and you change the coffee the day after close, it's immediately going to throw the place into an upset. You can't change anything because everybody's sitting on the edge of their seat waiting to see what's really going to happen. And they're going to read into the teeniest, tiniest little things as it's the end of the world. So go in, and if anything, put in a second coffee maker. You know, send the messages that gets everybody comfortable. And then oftentimes what will happen is things will kind of settle out on their own. And you'll see the cream rise to the top. There'll be some natural departures. You don't have to let anybody go. So, you know, it's slower is better. I know some people that never integrate any companies they buy. I mean, we have some serial buyers that we work with, and they let everything remain on standalone. They're like, you know what? We know we can save $1 million a year by eliminating all the efficiencies. It's not worth it to us. We're just going to let them continue to operate independently. We'll do some co-branding, you know, so it's ABC company and XYZ company on the bottom, but they keep the brand intact. So it's just so critical. In this case, one of the biggest killers was the owner. There was so much of the business was wrapped up into that owner's presence, and the owner was the classic unmanageable owner. Became very difficult to work with. The buyer in this case really didn't read that very well up front, and they integrated some of their, you know, rank and file management for him to report to, for lack of a better description, and that chemistry definitely was not there. It was like, wait a minute, I started this business, you're old enough, years old as my son, and I was changing your diet, you know, you get all that kind of discussion going on, and everything just totally goes south. But you can preempt all that stuff as long as you understand that it's going to happen and talk about how to manage that individual or not manage them, you know, in the sense of management. Seller left the business about 6 months into a 2-year earnout, abandoned the earnout. Wasn't going to get it anyway because the business had you know, gone down to nothing. But the business just continued to spiral after he left. So just not manageable. There was a GM that was put in place to replace the owner, and you know, it's slowly working its way back up. Number 6, an $80 million buyer acquires a $5 million healthy seller at a very low 2x EBITDA, and both live happily ever after. So, how does this happen, and where do I get one of these? So, there was a lot of time spent on the relationship building here, and it was actually spent really, it was right about there in the process, but it was before the offer was even received. And what was discovered during that relationship building is that money was not important to this business owner. He was 79 years old, and he, he wanted his business and his people to go to the right people. And I mean, he even alluded to that. He didn't come out and say money's not important, but he alluded, we just got the sense that this isn't about the money for him. So the business probably should have sold for 3.5 times, maybe close to 4. It was still a smaller business, but it was a really good business. So in the end, yeah, it worked out great. The people and the culture were perfect. These people had great chemistry. It just worked out wonderfully. Now, a $6 million buyer requires a $150 million seller. So this is the one deal that didn't happen in this space, but it happened in a very similar space in the building services arena. Actually happened in a commercial janitorial service. So very similar, unskilled labor, heavy immigrant labor force, asset-light business, but it just, and we were actually on the buy side of this, so we were representing the $150 million buyer here. And the short answer was that we introduced a financial component to the transaction. So a lot of people had this mindset that, I'm a 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, $10 million company, whatever. And I'd love to buy something much bigger than me, but I really can't do it. It's because it's just not done. Well, it actually is done. You may not have the money to do it, but because of today's market conditions, the money is readily available. We're involved in 3 deals right now where the buyer is smaller than the seller. And all 3 of them have both a senior lender in place, so your local bank, and a mezzanine financer. So somebody who's more expensive, kind of 12, 13% interest, with some warrants on the business. But and it sounds like a lot of money, but when you run the math on the deal, it's actually affordable. The math works, even though it's like almost credit card interest rate. But those deals are doable. Question?
Yeah, so you say you're going with 3 smaller buyers.
Yep.
What percentage of your portfolio is that? Is that 1% or 8% or?
Well, right now right now it's like 25% of the total deals that we're working on, but even that would be really high. That's a function of the market conditions you got out there right now. 2 years from now, I won't be able to tell you that that's the same percentage of our business. It is just, the sun, the moon, and the stars are aligned right now with access to capital, trying to find a home with people that have the talent. So, if Brandon is the best at what he does, and he's trapped in a small company body, and he wants to go out and buy somebody big, and he can convince through, a good business plan that, he can acquire businesses and have that same stellar performance that he has in his own business with a bigger business, he can get people to back him. It's really not that hard. And it's not that hard because there is so much capital out there. I mean, you got private equity groups that call us every day that are trying to find a home for this money that's been committed to them by their limited partners. And if they don't find a home for it, if they don't do a deal, they got to give the money back. And that's a problem because this is how they make their money. So it is a really very real market condition right now. The deal closed, and it was a very unusual integration in that the seller actually had to they had to sign what's called a shared services agreement. So in other words, so I'm buying $150 million in revenue. I've only got 6. I don't even know enough people that can process payroll for that many people. And this $150 million company was fully integrated into a much larger organization. So that larger organization was providing all of the back office functions. So the $6 million company had to go out and hire all the people that were going to be needed to service a $156 million company. Meanwhile, they were paying the seller to provide all of those back office services. So it was very messy, doable, but very messy. And it took about a year, for them to get all the people in place. And now they're working on their next deal. It's another $60 million company that they're buying up in Canada. You know, so when you think about it, in the span of 3 years, you know, they'll go from $6 million to $250 million, you know, between their acquisitive and organic growth. And, you know, they're still doing deals. So I guess the message for this case is don't limit yourself and don't restrict yourself to what you think is doable. There's a lot more things that are doable in today's M&A marketplace than you would actually think about. So with that, just the final takeaways. Remember, the secret to success and doing a successful transaction is following good process. So think back to the golf discussion, flying the plane, climbing a mountain, or doing your jobs. It's all about good process, and doing a deal is no different. Follow the process. The process is in the book, and if you follow the process, you've got high probabilities of having a good outcome and not a bad or an ugly one. So with that, is there any questions left? I'll take them. I've got 3 minutes to spare. That's pretty good. I'm not very good at pacing myself, but I did pretty good this time. Yeah?
Okay, a situation where two similarly sized companies in the same geographic area, one and in the same marketplace, one approaches, company one approaches company two, and is required to buy, and there's the sharing of information. To me, just listening and thinking about that, of course I think about that myself, is this guy really just going to buy my company for material? Is there any way to protect it?
Well, you're going to have, so the question is, how do I protect myself against the information I'm sharing with parties? And you're going to have a non-disclosure agreement in place that certainly is a deterrent to them doing any poaching of people from your business or contacting your customers as a result of information that they've learned through this process. And I generally see it being very, very rare as long as you're entering discussions with the right parties. So again, think back to the point about we started with 100 people in the buyer pool, or 50 people, and you get down to 10. That process of whittling those people out, that happens before your name ever gets released. They don't know who your company is. They're making their decisions based on a teaser that we give them as one. It talks about your financials, talks about the target market, talks about your general geographic service area, talks about the strategic advantages of your business. It's enough to whet their appetite, but it's not enough for them to know who you are and reverse engineer that. And that doesn't get disclosed unless we know that we've got a bona fide person. And if it's a competitor, you're going to know, oh, that guy's a slime ball. No way. But he may have a lot of money. Yeah, it ain't worth the risk. You know what I mean? You've got to make those calls if it's a competitor in the market. And I know people that will say, I want to do a deal, but I don't want to do a deal with anybody that's in my town. It needs to be somebody, outside my market. Or they'll say specifically, it can't be this person, this person, this person, or that person. So they just can't be trusted.
So if somebody comes to you and wants to sell their business and you want to develop a pool of people to buy the business, how do you do that? You advertise in that immediate area, it's a service business that's going to be in that.
If it's a broker, so if it's a broker that knows your industry and is going to represent you, they shouldn't be running an ad. They should know the target market. They should be able to pull together that buyer pool. So like as a firm, we have access to databases and we have just general market knowledge that we can leverage to pull together a buyer pool. If you were going to sell your business on your own, and it was a small business, you can go to bizbuysell.com or mergernetwork.com. Those are both websites you can blindly post your business, and a lot of people read it, and you can manage the inquiries and everything like that. So that there's, you can leverage the internet to advertise it, but a banker that knows your industry shouldn't really need to. Other questions? Yeah.
Has anybody asked what's the best question? How's the best way to approach somebody you want to buy?
So the question is the best way to approach somebody you want to buy. And
we all get that.
I've done this, and in businesses when I've owned and I was buying, And half the time they get offended. So they're like, well, what do you mean by that? You think I'm in trouble? And other times they're flat. So you don't know what to expect. I mean, what I've generally found is, look, I'm in the same industry as you are. We compete against each other, or maybe we don't, but, either way, I think we could benefit from developing a relationship. So how about if we have a cup of coffee sometime? If we sit down, we have lunch, and you just get to know the person. Then I just ask somebody, what are your exit plans? You gonna pass this down to your kids? No, I don't have any kids, and they hate the business anyway, if I did have them, so. Well, what's your plan? I don't know, probably sell in, 3 or 5 years, whatever. I can't live forever. Well, what would you think about if we talked about maybe doing a deal together? I mean, I approach it very carefully, but I always generally start with the question, what's your exit plan? Because everybody needs to have one. If you don't have one, you need to get one, because there's only a 15% chance your kids are interested in this business, because millennials want nothing to do with this industry. Yeah.
Within this segment, have you dealt with any, with the buying and selling, dual shops or double-breasted, union, non-union?
Yeah, so the question is, have we dealt with any deals where the shops are double-breasting, union and non-union? I have not had the displeasure of dealing with a transaction where somebody's playing both sides of the fence, but what I can tell you is when we've represented parties that were out, so they were non-union, and they're looking to buy another company, where we run into this is where somebody's operating predominantly in a non-union market. And they say, well, I want to go buy up in Boston. And they're operating in the South. So, well, what size company are you looking to buy? Well, I want to buy something $10 to $15 million in revenue minimum. Are you prepared to be part of the union, even if that company is non-union? Because the bottom line is if it's not union now, it's certainly in the crosshairs of the union. And if it gets unionized after you buy the business, it changes the financial picture of the business entirely. So sometimes, and we've done deals where the buyer has to, when they're putting the deal together in their mind and they're valuing the deal, they've got to factor that in. And because they were union and the seller was non-union, I knew I was immediately going to get tagged for this and have to convert it. And now my wages double, health and welfare and pension, and I've got to factor that into the deal. Any other questions? We've got time for one more. Yeah.
Your personal experience, if you are selling, outside of the people that are actually selling, can you try to negotiate a golden parachute for somebody else that's not part of the purchase agreement? Say it's a key employee that, especially if it's on a contingency, somebody that you feel is going to be very, very key to the continued success of that company.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's very common in deals. And a good buyer will see that. Will say, look, this deal is nothing without Bob and Mary and Jim. So, we were involved in a deal just earlier this year where the buyer said, look, I'm going to pay you $7 million for the business, but I'm going to give Bob and Mary and Jim each $500,000 in addition to that out of my pocket as the buyer if they're still here in 3 years. So that's not uncommon. And which is great, because me as the seller, I didn't have to pay for that. Of course, they might have given me that money if I would have negotiated that, but either way, everybody's expectations got met. So last thing before I let you go, everybody could, I've been told to demand these from everybody and crack the whip and making sure you fill them out. Yeah, throwing away was there. Thank you all for your time this afternoon. I hope this was informative. If you want to get information,